Historical events can become forgotten for many reasons, but one of those that's really hardest to stomach is that sometimes they're nearly forgotten simply because someone in power didn't want us to know. A witness recalled on August 8th, 1975. It sounded as if the sky was collapsing and the earth was cracking. What followed was very probably the most deadly infrastructure collapse in human history. Yet for nearly 2 decades, the world did not know what had befallen the people of China's Henan province on the day that the water dragon came. The Great Leap Forward was a campaign to rapidly industrialize the People's Republic of China. The goal was to transform the massive nation of some 540 million people that had just endured more than a decade of brutal war. The Association for Asian Studies explains, the ironically titled Great Leap Forward was supposed to be the spectacular culmination of Mao Zedong's program for transforming China into a communist paradise. In 1958, Chairman Mao launched a radical campaign to outproduce Great Britain, mother of the Industrial Revolution, while simultaneously achieving communism before the Soviet Union. Central to the idea was a massive program to dam China's rivers. Author Shui Fu writes on the website of the Canada-based Energy Probe Research Foundation. Most people associate the Great Leap Forward with national campaigns to increase iron and steel production. But just as important was engaging the mass movement for the large-scale water conservancy campaign. At that time, water conservancy policy gave primacy to the accumulation of water and to irrigation, and gave only secondary consideration to drainage and flood control. Dam building was an essential part of Mao's vision. Journalist Nikita Makarenko explained on the science website Aussie in 2019. Chairman Mao Zedong, eager to modernize the country, ordered hundreds of dams built, which put people to work, provided electricity, and tamed rivers as part of his brutal Great Leap Forward. After swimming across the Yangtze River in 1958, Mao penned a poem about his obsession with dams. Great plans are being made. Walls of stone will stand upstream to the west. The mountain goddess, if she is still there, will marvel at a world so changed. Fu writes that the first dam construction boom in the 1950s was a thrilling time. People's communes, the Great Leap Forward, and the manufacture of iron and steel all stimulated the construction of more hydropower projects. Leaders boldly approved projects to accumulate more water for irrigation without knowing whether they were feasible. As pretty much everything was under the new party, there was a significant political element involved. Fu continues, there were virtually no large-scale water projects in China before 1949, but in the ensuing years, and especially in the years during and since the Great Leap Forward, the Chinese Communist Party has heavily promoted dam and reservoir construction as part of massive national campaigns. In less than 40 years, all of China's major rivers had been dammed. Dam projects became more than just another kind of construction project. The campaigns promoting dam construction equated harnessing rivers with developing the country and mandated absolutely that citizens demonstrate their positive support and political enthusiasm for the project. All a particular leader had to do was point the finger at a certain place and the decision would be made to build a dam between one mountain and another. The engineers were left to assess whether the project made sense, but few projects were rejected. No one wanted to be accused of being a rightist or an obstruction on the bridge leading to communism. One part of the project had to do with the Hui River in central China, which flows through Henan province, home to some 40 million people in 1950. Thayer Watkins of San Jose State University's Department of Economics explains, China has been plagued with severe floods from time immemorial. The area where the weather systems from the north, from North Central Asia, meet the weather systems from the South China Sea, is particularly hard hit. This is the region of the Hui River. In 1950, shortly after an episode of severe flooding in Hui River Basin, the government of the People's Republic of China announced a long-term program to control the Hui River system. It was called Harness the Hui River. The name captured the dual purpose of the program. 1, to control the river and prevent flooding, and 2, utilize the water captured for irrigation and to generate electricity. The project included numerous small dams and 2 major dams, the Shimenantan Dam on the Hong River and the Banqiao Dam on the Ru River, both part of the Hui River system. Technology writer Andrew Zelinsky wrote in Popular Mechanics in 2022, the Banqiao Dam was supposed to be a masterpiece of human engineering, an earthen embankment dam straddling China's Ru River. It was an attempt to harness water to irrigate farmland to the Huai River Basin, an area that covers several provinces and is home to 170 million people. Begun in April of 1951, the scope of the project was extraordinary. Zaleski writes that its core was made up of tons of packed piled clay, which is largely impervious to water penetration, surrounded by a thick shell of sand. The dam was 8 stories tall, tasked with keeping 158 billion gallons of water, the equivalent of 240,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools, from pouring into the villages below. Initially, there were problems. Watkins writes there were some flaws in the design and construction of Banqiao Dam, including cracks in the dam and sluice gates. With advice provided by Soviet engineers, the Banqiao Dam and the Shimanatan Dam were reinforced and expanded. The Soviet design was called an iron dam, a dam that could not be broken. Zaleski writes, construction of the dam took 15 months, and when it was finished in 1952, Banqiao was heralded by government officials as the Iron Dam, tall enough, wide enough, and sturdy enough to withstand 100-year floods and 1,000-year catastrophic floods. It was, you could say, the Titanic of dams. The 1,000-year flood measure was important. Christopher C. Burt notes on the website Weather Underground in 2018, one of the most critical issues facing hydrologists and engineers in calculating what the worst-case scenario might be in terms of rainfall when they are tasked with the construction of dams and other infrastructure projects. In general, they want to know what the heaviest rainfall for specific periods of time might be over the course of a projected life of the structure. In other words, if the dam is expected to stand without reconstruction for 100 or 200 years, then they must know what the maximum amount of rain might be in a once-in-a-100 or 200-year storm. Burt writes that the Iron Dam was designed to survive a once-in-1,000 years return rainfall event, which was calculated as being 300 millimeters, or 11.81 inches of rainfall, over 24 hours. But there were other reasons to worry about the Iron Dam. Watkins notes, civil engineers, when designing a dam, must establish the capacity of the dam and the rate at which water can be passed through the dam by means of floodgates. Floodgates are an expensive component of a dam's construction, so engineers must consider a trade-off between the cost of the dam and the security it will provide. Burt notes the construction and maintenance of the Banqiao Dam was clouded by controversy, with one of China's leading hydrologists, Chen Xing, who was involved in the dam's design and construction, concerned that not enough sluice gates had been installed. Zaleski writes that Chen's advice was to add 12 gated channels, called sluice gates, to the Banqiao Dam. These would allow excess reservoir water to be discharged down the Ru River in the event of a heavy storm. Instead, only 5 sluice gates were built. Another issue arose around the dam policy in general. Touted as a success after its completion, more dams were built. China's Phoenix News reported in 2007, in the 3 years following the reinforcement and expansion of the Banqiao and Shimantan reservoirs, reservoir construction in the Central Plains region surged uncontrollably. From 1957 to 1959 alone, more than 100 reservoirs were built in the Jumanadian area. A water conservancy expert named Chen Xing pointed out at the time that prioritizing water storage over drainage in plains areas would severely damage the aquatic environment. Excessive surface water accumulation would cause floods. Excessive groundwater accumulation would lead to waterlogging, and artificially maintaining a high groundwater level would promote salt accumulation and cause alkalinity disasters. Zaleski writes that in the confined Huai River Basin, where the Banqiao Dam was constructed, these concerns were even more acute. Overbuilding dams and reservoirs in surrounding Henan would raise the water table to unsafe levels, waterlogging agricultural land. Plains previously used for flood diversion were now the locations of enormous reservoirs. If the Banqiao Dam did collapse, the water would have nowhere to go. People lived on the old floodplains, and any uninhabited soil was saturated. For his warnings, Zaleski writes, Chen was maligned by the government as a right-wing opportunist, and eventually forced from his job overseeing the design of several other dam projects in the region. The Great Leap Forward was, for many reasons, a disaster. Forced collectivization, attempts to move peasants from private property to people's communes, along with poor management, corruption, and a culture of fear that prevented honest reporting of problems, combined into food shortage and famine. Estimates vary, but at least tens of millions died. One way that Mao retained power through the disaster was to shift blame and use that as an excuse to purge critics. In 1966, the chairman initiated the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution. The goal of the Cultural Revolution was to preserve Chinese communism by purging remnants of capitalist and traditional elements from Chinese society. The environment of the Cultural Revolution would affect the Iron Dam of the Great Leap Forward. Chinese Energy News reported in 2012. Banqiao Reservoir was one of the four largest reservoirs in the Jumadian area. As a star project of the 1950s, it had always enjoyed the reputation of being an iron shell dam in the minds of officials and people in Henan. Even though Shuaiping County downstream had issued warnings about the possible collapse of the Ru River Dam, no one thought that the Banqiao Reservoir would collapse. In 1975, Jumadian was deeply mired in the catastrophe of the Cultural Revolution. Factions were everywhere, each busy with their own revolution, and flood control was completely forgotten. Into this environment came an extraordinary weather event. Bert writes, in early August 1975, Typhoon Nina made landfall along the coast of China near Shanghai. The storm weakened as it moved inland and merged with a cold front that straddled Henan province, resulting in the development of a series of near-stationary thunderstorms. The greatest short-term rainfall event in modern Chinese records ensued. Some 41.73 inches of rain fell in just 24 hours. The dam was designed around a 1,000-year flood, calculated to drop a maximum of 11.81 inches of rainfall over 24 hours. In reality, Bert writes, that much rain fell in just 2 hours during the 1975 storm. The amount of rain over a 6-hour period dropped by the storm, 32.68 inches of rain, still holds the world's record. The Chinese website People's Daily wrote in 2005, a pouring rain following the third typhoon that battered China that year soaked the area within about 7 million population, swelling more than 100 medium or small reservoirs. When the rain continued, the days were like nights as rain fell like arrows, survivors were quoted as saying by official records. The mountains were covered all over by dead sparrows after the rain. Still, the paper reports, on August 7, 1975, just a day before the tragedy, almost nobody in Jumadian were aware that a catastrophe was looming. The website International Rivers explains, on the night of August 8, 1975, a line of people frantically piled sandbags atop Henan Province's Banqiao Dam while being battered by the worst storm ever recorded in the region. Journalist Eric Fish noted on the podcast The China Chronicles, workers and soldiers who'd been dispatched to help with the crisis frantically tried to pile up whatever they could to reinforce the wave wall and stem the tide. Bags of straw, branches, even an old bookshelf. But it was like throwing water balloons at a forest fire. The tide just kept rising. International Rivers writes they were in the race with the rapidly rising Ru River to save the dam and the millions of people that lay sleeping downstream. It was a race they were about to lose. The response was disorganized. International Rivers writes, in an effort to mitigate downstream floods that were already severe, Banqiao was ordered not to fully open its sluice gates early in the storm. Then communication lines were knocked out, leaving operators guessing as to how the situation outside was unfolding. Hu Defeng, a technician at Banqiao Reservoir at the time and in charge of managing the irrigation canals, recalled, on the 5th, we couldn't hear the weather forecast. According to the operating procedures, we should have released water, but we didn't receive instructions from higher authorities. Who dared to make the decision? Still, officials seemed complacent. The newspaper China Energy News reports, without any flood control equipment or supplies, no measures could be taken. People could only watch helplessly as the reservoir's water level rose rapidly, but no one imagined the dam would collapse. On August 7th, someone even reported to Zhao Wenfan, director-deputy of the Banqiao Reservoir Management Bureau, that the fish in the dam had escaped through the spillway and that someone should be sent down there to stop them. Zaleski writes, by the time the situation grew dire, communication lines had been knocked out by the storm. With no information, Banqiao's operators waited too long to open the 5 sluice gates, which, as Chen Xing had predicted, were not enough. Accumulated silt from the reservoir bed also blocked the gates as rain continued to fall. International Rivers writes, by the time the gates were fully opened, it was too late. Water was rising faster than it could escape. China Energy News quotes Chen Bin, director-commander of the local Revolutionary Committee, who witnessed the entire process. The phone lines were down, the walkie-talkies were down, so we had to send people back and forth between the south and north sides of the dam to relay messages. The water level was still a few inches from the top of the dam, and it looked like it would soon be leveled. The breach in the approach bridge at the south end of the dam was leaking everywhere, and everyone was trying to plug it. But how could they? Thunder roared close to the top of the dam. The lightning was incredibly bright, illuminating the torrential rain. Everyone was soaked from head to toe, and even the ground was wet. But, China Energy News writes, just after 1 a.m. the sky cleared and stars emerged from behind the storm clouds. There was an eerie calm as someone yelled, "The water level is going down! The flood is retreating!" But, Fish explains, one official who oversees the dam turns pale. He understands what this sudden recession of water means. It had gone somewhere, and it hadn't just evaporated. Bin recalled a flash of light followed by a deafening roar as if the earth had collapsed. The dam foundation lurched and flipped over, the sound of water crashing beneath my feet deafening. International Rivers writes, one survivor recalled that a few seconds later it sounded like the sky was collapsing and the earth was cracking. Ben recalled by then the floodwaters had breached the breakwater, stripping away the sand and soil and pushing open a gap in the section of the dam that crossed the Rue River. The water churned at the breach like a boiling pot. In the blink of an eye, the breach widened, separating those on the north and south banks of the dam. They couldn't cross or contact each other. Zhang Quanchang, the director of the Reservoirs Revolutionary Committee, was extremely anxious, staring blankly at me and repeatedly asking, "What do we do? What do we do?" Fish notes one worker, referencing an old folk tale, reportedly screamed, "The river dragon has come." International Rivers explains the equivalent of 280,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools burst through the crumbling dam, taking with it entire towns. The People's Daily writes, houses and trees disappeared all in an instant. Numerous corpses and bodies of cattle floated in water amid people wailing for help. Floods wiped Dancheng Commune downstream immediately from the map, killing all 9,600 citizens. To worsen the situation, the dams of the city's other 61 reservoirs collapsed, one after another within a short period, unleashing about 6 billion cubic meters, nearly 212 billion cubic feet of floods, to an area of about 3,800 square miles. Phoenix News writes, as a result, the devastating floods inundated 30 counties and cities, submerged 3 million acres of farmland, affected 10.15 million people, destroyed 6.8 million houses, and ruined 62 miles of the Beijing-Yangzhou Railway, turning the tracks into a twisted mess. A Chinese journalist writing under the pseudonym Yi Si reports that by August 17th, 1.1 million people remained trapped by flooding, with 50 to 60% of food airdropped into the area, floating in the murky waters. It would take weeks for the waters to drain, revealing bloated corpses dotting the landscape in the late summer sun. The victims of this disaster deserve to be remembered, but they were very nearly forgotten. The disaster wasn't reported in the West, or in fact most of the world. Heck, it wasn't even reported in most of China at the time. Makarenko notes that the government prohibited news of the disaster from being broadcast nationwide, and there simply weren't any international observers present. It wasn't widely reported in China until 1995, 2 decades after it happened. Official documents weren't declassified until 2005. Exactly how many died in the disaster, well, we really don't know. The official death toll was 26,000, but that number is almost certainly far too small. The official secrecy, the lack of communication at the time, the fact that officials during the Cultural Revolution would have been afraid to give accurate numbers, and the inherent difficulty in figuring out how many people die in a disaster of this scale, not just in the immediate flood, but afterwards due to disease, starvation, exposure, means that the number will probably never be known. But a Human Rights Watch Asia estimate in 1995 was that around 230,000 died. And the thing is, given a new enthusiasm for dam construction, famously shoddy construction techniques that are derided as tofu construction, and demographic changes, that number may well pale next to the death toll if there were to be a similar disaster today. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community at Locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.